The financial quarterback. And up next, we have an exciting discussion on artificial intelligence and the stock market crash. What do they have to do with each other? And more. We have special New York Times best-selling author Martin Ford, Silicon Valley entrepreneur. We'll get his thoughts on the robotics revolution, job automation, and more. So for those who are not familiar with your work, Martin, give a little biographical sketch of what got you into artificial intelligence.
Well, I'm a futurist, and I've written 4 books now that focus on AI and robotics, and especially on the potential impact on the job market. And I became involved in this more than 10 years ago. I wrote my first book in 2009, right after the financial crisis that happened then. And I started thinking about the potential for a lot of jobs to be automated and what that would mean for the economy. And I've written quite a lot about that. And I remain concerned that that's going to be a real issue for us in the future as artificial intelligence becomes more powerful, more capable, and as it begins to potentially displace more workers in a wide range of areas.
So what prompts a kid to get into artificial intelligence? Like, what's your background?
Well, my background was software engineering, and I ran a small software company. I wasn't doing specifically artificial intelligence, but as that business progressed, it started to, in many ways, automate or become digitized. A lot of the jobs that were there began to evaporate, and that sort of got me thinking about this issue, and I became much more interested in what was going to happen in the future. So since then, I've kind of shifted my career and become much more focused on AI and robotics and especially the potential impact of those technologies on society and on the economy.
So I'd like you to talk a little bit about what you do and then the impact of artificial intelligence and robotics on the economy and society as a whole. That could be a
right.
mouthful,
what I do is I'm a futurist and I write a lot. I've written several books. I do a lot of speaking engagements. I go and have discussions with people about these issues. A lot of very technical people that are focused on these technologies, creating them, as well as economists and so forth. And sort of my kind of role is to bring all that together and think about the implications for the future. So, I mean, artificial intelligence is going to have an enormous impact on society and on the economy in the future. The potential for many jobs to be automated is only one aspect of that, of course, and many people kind of view that as a negative, but there are going to be enormous positive impacts as well. It's going to completely jumpstart our ability to innovate, to create. We can think of artificial intelligence as really being an amplification of our own intellect, our own ability to create. And really everything that we have as a civilization is based on human intelligence, human creativity. So we are finally approaching a time when we're going to have a tool that vastly amplifies that, in some cases replaces it with something more powerful. And that's going to have enormous implications across the board for innovation. So we're going to see breakthroughs in medicine. In fact, we're already beginning to see that. We're going to see artificial intelligence leveraged to solve some of the biggest problems that we face, clean energy, climate change, and so forth, eradicating global poverty. These are all areas where AI is going to be crucial, but it's a technology that is going to bring enormous benefits, but at the same time, it's also going to carry with it some real risks. And one of those, again, is the potential impact on the job market and on inequality. But then there are a whole other range of risks. We have to worry about the weaponization of artificial intelligence, how it could be, we could have autonomous weapons. We've seen cases where algorithms used in high stakes scenarios are biased in some ways, for example, on the basis of race or gender and so forth. And there are going to be enormous impacts on privacy and many, many other areas. So there are a lot of issues with AI going forward that I think people really need to be familiar with.
Why are they biased on race? Or is that just a thing because our people have gone more woke? Like, how could a robot be biased on race? I mean, I don't...
Well,
or is it what the programmer puts in, or, the inputs?
Right. the algorithms, the actual software are not biased, and a robot, the machine is not biased. But what happens is that these learning algorithms are trained on data that's generated by people. So if there is bias in that data, for example, based on the way people have acted in the past, then that bias will be picked up and propagated by the algorithms. To give you one example, there have been cases where algorithms that screen resumes have been shown to be biased. Now, the way you train an algorithm to screen resumes is you give it plenty of examples from the past of resumes that were submitted, and whether or not those resumes were taken on to the next step, whether the candidate was brought in for more interviews. So if there was any bias in the way managers were acting over that time, then that bias would also get picked up by the algorithm. And so that's the kind of thing that we see, and many people are working on ways to correct for that.
So it's hard to differentiate fact from fantasy when it comes to discussing AI today. Let's start with the movie fiction. Should we as humans be wary of artificial intelligence as it permeates more and more of our lives?
We should definitely be concerned about the implications of it. Now, if you've watched movies like The Terminator, right, where the AI wakes up and becomes malevolent and attempts to kill us, that's not something that I worry too much about. There are some real concerns if at some point in the future we build an AI system that is smarter than us, that is super intelligent, that it might potentially act in ways that are harmful to us. But I think that's quite a distance off in the future, probably decades away. But that's the kind of thing that you've heard people like Elon Musk worrying about. So there are some potential legitimate concerns there. But for the foreseeable future, the concerns are less dramatic than that, but they are real. I talked already about the bias. I mentioned the ability potentially of AI to eliminate a lot of jobs. If you're doing any kind of job that's fundamentally routine and repetitive in nature, then it's probably not going to be too long before an algorithm or a robot comes along that is going to do at least a portion of that job, and that's going to have an impact on employment for sure. Weaponization is another real concern. We're going to see potentially autonomous weapons, which can be quite terrifying. These are not, these are not the Terminator, where the machine itself is deciding to attack us.
Not yet, right?
But not yet, and I think not for a long time. But we are going to have fully autonomous weapons that could be, set into motion by someone else, perhaps by an adversary, perhaps by terrorists, and could autonomously identify targets and attack people, kill people, and so forth. And this would be a really terrifying scenario. It would be a kind of weapon that we've never seen before. Some people consider it to be a weapon of mass destruction. So there are a lot of issues there to be concerned about. And I think everyone should be, should spend some time becoming familiar with AI, because it's really going to be one of the most important forces that shapes the future for good and also potentially for worse.
Wow. So what about the stock market? Probably not your exact area of expertise, but on AI as it relates to investing, any gleanings from the recent stock market crisis?
I don't think that the recent downturn, I haven't heard that it's directly connected to AI in any way. I mean, it absolutely is true that the majority of trades on Wall Street are now algorithmic, right? Most of the trades happening are being generated by algorithms. And we have seen cases in the past. For example, you think back to when we had the famous flash crash. That was, many people thought, brought on by algorithms, which kind of had a herd instinct, and they all started selling at once. So that's a real concern, the fact that the stock market is largely now under algorithmic control. I don't know that the current downturn has been driven by that, but going forward, AI is going to have an enormous impact in many ways. It's not just directly on market trading, but in terms of the business models of companies, and their valuations going forward is going to be based more and more on how those companies deploy artificial intelligence in their business models.
So your most recent book, Rule of the Robots?
Right. Rule of the Robots, how artificial intelligence will transform everything.
Well, that's cool. And folks, we'll give that book to you for free if you schedule and keep a no obligation review with yours truly, Josh Jelinski, the financial quarterback. Just call us at 888-988-JOSH. And when we return, so call us at 888-988-JOSH. When we return in about 30 seconds, we'll be back with Martin Ford talking about more opportunities to seize with the AI revolution from New York Times bestselling author Martin Ford. When we return, Rise of the Robots was another bestseller he wrote. We'll talk about some of the lessons from Rise of the Robots, as well as Rule of the Robots. This is Josh Jelinski, the financial quarterback. Don't touch that dial. And we're back. This is Josh Jelinski, the financial quarterback, with Martin Ford. Call us at 888-988-JOSH, and I'll give you a copy of Rule of the Robots for free when you schedule and keep your no obligation review. So on to AI and algorithms. The reason I ask that question is, if you track virtually every major sell-off this year, it's plotted along defined numbers that a computer would know. And what I mean by that is the January sell-off corresponded with the market breaking the 200-day moving average. So one of these programmers may have put that into the algorithm. Then for a long time, 4150 was the floor of support. We touched it in February, and then March, and then April. But then once we broke through that, boom, all of a sudden 3,900 became the floor of support. And we broke through that, 3,700. So I can't pinpoint it, but it seems to have the mark of some type of technical trader-backed algorithm, where maybe it's just kind of common knowledge, certain of these thresholds, and programmers. Have you focused on that in any of your work?
I haven't, focused specifically on trading. I mean, certainly it is true that trading algorithms use those kinds of technical indicators like you're suggesting. These are very, very sophisticated algorithms. They also, for example, tap directly into news stories. I mean, companies like Bloomberg actually publish business news in a format that's designed for algorithms rather than people to read, right? So these algorithms can access that. They can read it in, tiny fractions of a second, much faster than any human being could even reach for a button. An algorithm can read, understand, process news, and then trade on it. So that's really what's happening. And I obviously I don't understand the details of those algorithms. That would be highly proprietary for the different hedge funds and so forth that are running these very sophisticated algorithms. But absolutely, that a lot of this is happening directly under the control of artificial intelligence.
That's interesting. So Elon Musk seems to think that it is a very serious situation, AI, and not a question of if, but when AI replaces human beings in highly important roles that govern our day-to-day lives. Obviously, you've written about that. You want to comment on Elon's thoughts?
Right. Well, Elon has a lot of thoughts. I mean, definitely, I would agree with him that robots and AI are going to displace people in many jobs, in many roles, and that the technology is going to become more and more important in business decision making. So it's not just the people working in an Amazon warehouse, for example, are gradually going to be replaced by more sophisticated robots. So those types of workers for sure are going to be impacted. But the same thing is going to happen with many white collar jobs, right? If you've got a job sitting in front of a computer, running a spreadsheet, doing some sort of relatively routine analysis, generating the same kind of reports again and again, all of that is going to be subject to automation as well. So going forward, more and more jobs are going to be impacted as this technology becomes more capable. The other thing to keep in mind is that, it looks to me like we're on the brink of tipping into a recession. We don't know how bad that recession will be, but it is, during recessions that technologies or that companies turn most aggressively toward these kinds of technologies. It's during a downturn when companies are trying to, cut back and save costs, that they really look for these efficiencies. So we may well see an acceleration of this as a result of the economic downturn that looks like we're heading toward.
So there's been a lot of rumblings lately about the Google engineer Blake, I think it's pronounced Lemoine, but not sure exactly, who claimed the company's Lambda language model for dialogue applications chatbot development system has become sentient. Do you believe he's right or no?
No, I don't. But it is true that these conversational systems have really just made amazing progress. And this is all due to some of the latest breakthroughs in artificial intelligence, and in particular, what are called large language models, which are basically AI systems, deep learning or neural networks that are trained on enormous amounts of text. I mean, literally like almost the whole internet, thousands and thousands of books, just incomprehensible amounts of written text. These systems are trained on, and then they can learn to generate very, very cohesive text of their own, often in response to a conversation. So that's what we're seeing here. But basically, what these systems are doing is that they're just stringing words together. They don't have any understanding of what those words mean. So they're able to kind of imitate a conversation, but they don't have a deep understanding of what is actually being talked about. They're just kind of, in essence, imitating this. So it's not sentient because there's no understanding there, right? That in order to have a sentient machine or a truly intelligent machine, it would have to understand what it was saying and how that relates to the real world. And we don't yet have that.
Will we ever? Meaning, I looked at the closest parallel of something that sounded really smart. I don't know if you're familiar with this. I believe it's the Holocaust Museum in like Canada or something, where they just took thousands and thousands of hours of Holocaust survivors' dialogue. And they were programming it for, I don't know, I want to say for years, with every question that anybody would ever ask a survivor of the Holocaust. But it was really mostly human input. So it was, to me, it was based on feedback and humans and then programming. It wasn't so that you would then ask them now, I think it's at the Smithsonian or some exhibit, and basically you could ask the Holocaust survivor, which is like a hologram, any question and they would be able to answer it. But it's really just because they've cataloged every question that was ever asked by thousands and thousands of grade school students and things like that. Have you followed that at all?
I haven't followed that particular story, but yeah, but it's the same kind of thing, right? You're training an algorithm on enormous amounts of data, as you said, and it absolutely can produce the right answers. It can produce very useful results, but that doesn't mean that it's sentient or conscious.
Yeah, it's not really smart
because it's giving the answer, but it doesn't understand the answer. It doesn't really know what it's saying. It's just doing a purely mechanical type process and spitting out answers. In the future, can we have conscious or sentient machines or machines that are as intelligent as people in that general sense? Yes. I mean, most computer scientists that are working on this believe that's inevitable. The debate is about how long it will take to get there. I would say at a minimum, it's a couple of decades away. And it could be, some people think it's 100 years or more away. There's a lot of debate about that, but it's a real challenge to get there. I think it's very clear that we're not there yet. And it's going to take a lot of more work in AI and a lot of important breakthroughs to get to that point.
But it seems to be that it like with this example, it's really they're getting a catalog of answers that are programmed in, and it just appears smart or sentient because it's programming in the emotion, it's programming in the thought, the pauses, but it isn't a real person. And I don't know if it'll ever, replace. It's like, for example, I've tested on the very basic level. What's the app? It's not AI, but if you're ordering coffee from a real person, or if you're ordering coffee from some computer program like what's the one? Like DoorDash or Grubhub. It's colder. It's not made exactly the same. They get the order right? But there's things like temperature control. There's things that, so it ends up being like when I order on my phone, this is an AI, but I think eventually it'll go this way. You'll order coffee and it'll be exactly how you want it because you can program that. But right now, a lot of these things are just dumb. Like I hate ordering DoorDash because the food always arrives cold and stuff like that. That's not AI exactly, but I think it'll go that way. How about apps like that? How are they going to be obviously they'll be transformed by AI, but are those companies looking into AI or no?
Well, I think so. I mean, even McDonald's is using artificial intelligence to take orders in drive-throughs, right? So, absolutely, all these companies are going to. I mean, any company that's running apps, I'm sure that they all already use AI to some extent, and that will become much more prevalent in the future. And these systems, again, they're not conscious, they're not sentient, they don't have any inner experience the way a person does, but they can get the job done, right? They can produce the right answer. And in some cases, like you say, it may be a less warm experience than dealing with the people, but I mean, there's plenty of evidence that if these systems offer lower cost and more convenience, people are willing to deal with a machine rather than a human. I mean,
no, but my point is they're dumb. The machines are dumb, meaning if you take coffee, making an espresso at Starbucks. So the Starbucks espresso machine is $20,000. It's basically, they've taken all the guesswork out so a barista anything a barista is going to screw up, they're making it so it's a consistent experience. But you could go to that barista and they don't know how to observe certain things, so it's still kind of a dumb end result. And I think AI, and I know this is your field of work, so I don't want to, it's almost like it's making our whole society dumber. And the algorithms, and it's like, I then went from like, I'm a coffee aficionado. So I just bought my own darn Italian espresso maker because I could make a better cup than going to Starbucks and having them screw up my cup every day. Does that make sense? Like it's almost like AI has made everybody dumb because they trust the machine, and the machine makes it, let's say, 80% good. There's a certain consistency, but it's not that sublime because a computer can't register sublime.
Sure. No, I mean, that's one concern, is that we're going to become more and more dependent on artificial intelligence, and therefore we will lose certain skills, right?
Yeah.
Certain ability to, and this is already, in fact, an issue in aviation, right, where pilots spend less time actually flying the plane, and therefore their skills can erode. And we've seen in the past that accidents caused by that, right? When they get into a situation where they need to have those skills and they've eroded. So this will probably become a problem throughout society as AI advances. But I mean, I think there will always be a place for people that are a coffee connoisseur and want to make their own coffee, right? But for the bulk of people who maybe are not that concerned with it, then technology will provide more convenience and a lower price, right? And different people will make different choices there.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So, folks, we'll take a short break, and when we return, we'll be back with Rule of the Robots and Rise of the Robots author Martin Ford, and I will give you his book for free if you schedule and keep your no obligation review. What to do in the bear market, 888-988-JOSH, 888-988-5674, 888-988-JOSH, Rule of the Robots. We'll be back after these messages. And we're back with Martin Ford, Rule of the Robots author. So, do you think, you've talked about this AI and unemployment, and we've heard this, AI and kind of a crisis of work. Talk through that a little bit. If 50% or 80% of jobs are replaced by robots, for example, coffee making and flipping a burger, I think all of those things will be replaced by robots because labor quality and labor shortages are higher. Um, so it will usher in an unemployment crisis. How do we solve that as a country or as a
Right.
world?
So that's the issue that I probably focused the most on. And there's still a debate over that. You can talk to economists, for example, that will tell you this is not a concern because historically technology has eliminated jobs, but it's also created new jobs, right? So people have found better things to do at higher wages, and obviously technology as it advances has been a great benefit to us. But I do think we're kind of reaching a tipping point where algorithms and robots are going to begin to match or exceed what many average typical people are capable of, right? Not everyone can lose their job working at McDonald's and then go become a robotics engineer or something, right? So we may reach a point where all of the average routine work that many people are best suited for really gets eliminated, and then there is very hard for those individuals to transition into something else because whatever else is out there might require very high skill set levels or creativity or personality traits that they don't have and so forth. So that's what concerns me. And I do think that at some point in the future, maybe it's 10 years from now, maybe longer than that, we're going to reach that point. And at that point, we've really got to look at a new economic paradigm, because the way our economy works right now is that people rely on income from jobs. I mean, that's primarily how people survive. And it's also how they gain purchasing power so that they can go out and act as consumers in the economy, right? We have a market economy, which is highly dependent on consumer demand, right? If there's nobody out there who wants to buy whatever you're producing or can buy whatever you're producing, then you will stop producing it, right? You're not going to run a factory cranking out widgets, and you're not going to provide a service if there's no one to buy it. So it's ultimately a threat to the whole economy, the whole capitalist system, if the distribution of income gets so out of whack that the bulk of people really don't have the income to go out there and drive the economy. So at that point, we've got to look at another solution. And what I've talked about a lot in my writing is the potential to someday have some sort of a universal basic income where we actually directly supplement people's income independent of what they can earn through work. And I personally think it's probably inevitable that we'll need to do something like that at some point in the future.
Now, the trucking industry is probably one of the first that will likely be impacted by AI as driverless vehicles are here. How far are we away from a truly driverless vehicle experience?
I think it's still a way off. I would tend to, a lot of people say that trucking will be the first thing. And, if you may have remembered Andrew Yang's presidential campaign, he talked a lot about this and always talked about truckers. The problem with autonomous vehicles is that it's a very difficult challenge, and it's a highly regulated industry, right? I mean, the idea that we're going to have these enormous, fully loaded trucks on the road, on the highway, traveling at 60 miles an hour with no person on board is a pretty big leap of faith, I think, for the public. I think it's going to be a while before we see that. So I actually worry more about workers in less regulated industries. For example, the workers in an Amazon warehouse, the workers in a McDonald's, and especially perhaps, what we would think of as kind of office drones, the white collar workers who, used to be sitting in cubicles, maybe now are working from home more, but are doing relatively routine manipulation of information, white collar tasks. I think all of these areas are going to be highly susceptible to automation over the next 10 years or so. But eventually, absolutely, the self-driving trucks are going to come along as well.
Yeah, I mean, I have a Tesla, and to me, it's dumb. I think some of these things are dumb. Maybe they've shut it down or throttled it. But do you study Tesla and what they're doing? I mean, because I actually find sometimes the technology is less safe than a regular. The beeps are going off. It's getting off of the road at a certain time. I mean, I guess the algorithm will keep learning, but or maybe are they throttling it because of all the deaths, so are they limiting it?
Yeah, I mean, Tesla and Elon Musk in particular has really oversold his system. Now, someday he may get there.
Like Tesla I would call it glorified cruise control. It's really cool, but you got to pay attention. You can't be.
Right. And you know, they're calling it a fully self-driving system, which is a bad name for it because it really isn't that. And I think it's quite dangerous that they do that. And I think it's also quite dangerous that they keep pushing these new capabilities over the network, you know, to directly to their customers. So I mean, I think eventually Tesla may get there because they do have an advantage in the sense that they've got all these cars, hundreds of thousands of Teslas on the road that are generating lots and lots of data from the real world that they can use to train their AI systems to get better and better. So that is a big advantage that the company has in terms of someday perfecting this technology. But clearly they're not there yet. And you know, Musk has been saying it's going to be this year. Back in 2020, he said he was going to have 1 million robo taxis on the road. I mean, you know, that we're not even close to that. So he's definitely overpromising that technology, which I think is quite dangerous. But, you know, it may be another 10 years or so where we are going to have autonomous cars on the road that are going to have a big impact for sure.
What about the implications for freedom? Meaning, like, I've heard that Tesla has a score for each of their drivers. So maybe I'm a bad boy, so my score is lower. So I don't have all of the features unlocked. But then I talked to my other friend. He has a higher score, and he loves it because he has more driverless technologies unlocked. The implications for freedom, the government then has this data. They know where you are. You know, I guess people don't care about it.
You know, I think people should care, and I mean, Tesla is you know, it's a very, very narrow example.
Yeah,
but
I'm just, you know, not
the real example is when you take what you're talking about with Tesla and you look at what they're doing in China, right?
Yeah, social credit score, yeah.
Which is not just a rating for how you drive; it's a rating for your whole life, literally, and your political opinions and what you say on social media, and maybe even what you buy in the store. You know, every aspect of your life is ranked and controlled, right? So that's the real Orwellian kind of nightmare that this can lead to. So we are absolutely seeing, you know, impacts on privacy across the board. Facial recognition systems are cropping up all over the place. And in many cases, people do tend to just accept these technologies without really thinking about the potential impact, and that's quite dangerous. So we do need to have more of a public discussion about that for sure.
Now, we got job losses due to automation. What are if you were to tell a child, you know, if you have I have 7 kids, you should go into this field, what field would you recommend? What are the top 3 fields in this new world that you're envisioning?
Right. I don't think it's so much picking a field. It's really the kind of work that you're going to be doing. And you know, the key thing is that you don't want to be doing something routine and repetitive. Okay. And so you can take a field like accounting, which many people kind of perceive as being very routine and you know, it's not whether you want to be an accountant or not. It's what kind of work are you doing? What's your role going to be as an accountant? If you're doing something that's more creative, working with clients, building relationships with people, this is something that's not so easy to automate, right? So you're going to be relatively safe. If, however, you're an accountant that is just sitting in front of a computer, you know, punching in numbers into a spreadsheet, then you're probably doing something that can be automated. And the same is true for many other occupations, lawyers, right? If you're a lawyer that's in the courtroom, arguing cases, coming up with new legal strategies, this kind of thing, then you're going to be relatively safe. If you're the kind of lawyer that is just doing legal research, you know, looking at case law, spitting out answers, then this is something that probably can be replaced by algorithms. So the general rule is that is not about picking a field. It's about picking your role within that field and the kind of work that you're going to be doing and making sure that you're doing something creative, something that involves thinking outside of the box, something that involves connecting with other people. You know, that's what's important in terms of, at least in terms of what we would think of as more white collar professions. Now, the one field that I would say is going to be relatively safe in general is going to be anything that we might think of as kind of a skilled trade type job. So think of electricians, plumbers. Or nurses, you know, these are the types of jobs that really require lots of mobility and dexterity in a unpredictable environment, right? And it's going to be a long, long time before we can ever build a robot that can do those kinds of jobs. I mean, that would require a science fiction robot, like something from, C-3PO from Star Wars or something, in order to do what a plumber does, right? So that's not going to happen for decades. So those kinds of fields are relatively secure, for sure.
And when we return, folks, we'll be back. I'll be asking Martin Ford about Waymo. And what is the biggest piece of advice that Martin Ford, best-selling author of Rule of the Robots, would give to our audience today? And if you want his free book, The Rule of Robots, you get it free. You can buy it on Amazon, wherever books are sold. Do you prefer them buying on Amazon or your website, Martin?
On Amazon is fine. Thanks.
And that's another example. Books. I have my book, Retirement Reality Check. I find that, because everybody buys it on Amazon, then Amazon has all the data. So it's kind of another sign of the times. So Martin Ford, get his book, Rule of the Robots, or you get it free when you call us for the bear market survival session. It's 45 minutes with our team at Wealth Quarterback, fee-based fiduciaries, and we will be there for you in these uncertain times. Call us for the 27-point ultimate financial game plan, 888-988-JOSH, 888-988-5674. We'll be back after these messages. And we're back with Martin Ford of Rule of the Robots. And so, Martin, what's the biggest piece of advice you want to give to our audience today?
Well, I would say, become informed about artificial intelligence and what it is going to mean for the future, because I genuinely believe it's going to be one of the biggest things that shapes the future and shapes all of our lives. And that's probably especially true if you're a young person just getting started out. This is just going to have enormous importance in terms of its impact on your career and on the world at large. So you really need to understand something. You don't have to become an AI expert and understand the nuts and bolts of it, but you need to understand about the technology, roughly how it works and how it's likely to evolve in the future, and the positive and negative impacts that it can potentially have on society and on your own career. And again, this is what I really try to explore in Rule of the Robots. So I think it's, however you do it, it's really important to have that understanding.
Now, how should investors approach specifically investing in companies that will be significant participants in the AI and robotics revolution? Any companies you like? You say these are the best players? This is the Amazon of AI?
Right now, it's relatively concentrated. The primary players in AI are Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, as well as similar companies like Tencent in China. So it is relatively concentrated in terms of the companies that are making the biggest impact in terms of actually developing the technology. I mean, there are a number of startups out there, but most of those are not public companies that people can invest in. But a more broader point is that really this is becoming a systemic technology. I mean, in my book, Rule of the Robots, I say that AI is becoming almost like electricity. It's going to be everywhere. It's going to impact everything. So it's not just about companies that are in the field of artificial intelligence and developing this technology. It's really going to be about companies in every single industry. And the companies so as an investor, if you're looking at companies to invest in, one thing to look at is what is their AI strategy? How are they utilizing artificial intelligence? And the companies that are doing the best job of that are going to be the winners, I would say, because again, this is going to be such a consequential technology that it's likely to make the difference between which companies succeed and which ones fails. And there definitely, I think, to some extent, will be a first mover advantage. So I would say for any investor that's looking at business opportunities or companies to invest in, absolutely focus on AI. What is this company doing with it? Is it just hype? Or are they really doing meaningful things with artificial intelligence? And this is going to be one of the primary things that determines their success going forward.
Now, you've talked briefly a while ago about artificial intelligence and medicine. What are the companies that are getting it right there? And what are they doing? That's exciting.
Well, we're seeing that across the board. There are many startup companies that are using, for example, artificial intelligence to discover drugs, new drugs. I'm not sure if any of these have gone public yet, but they probably will be seeing IPOs in the relatively near future. That's going to be, you know, an enormously powerful tool. I think that you know, medical device manufacturers and so forth are increasingly getting into this. They're going to be building systems in areas like radiology and so forth. Again, the big companies like Google are also playing an important role in this. So it's definitely an area to watch. And it's also, you know, insurance companies, hospital systems are all, again, going to be potential players that can benefit from AI because they're going to deploy it.
Yeah, for example, like Tesla, it's only a matter of time before they get into car insurance. I mean, I think they are in certain states because then they have all this data, so they can figure out who's a safe driver that they want to insure and who are the people that they don't want to insure. So, what other areas do you think are opportunities to seize when it comes to thinking about AI and robotics and investing in particular?
Well, I think understand the technology and look at companies, regardless of the industry, look at companies that have an artificial intelligence strategy and are really making investments in deploying this. So, I mean, it's true of every industry, the insurance industry, the retail industry, whatever industry you're interested in, focus on artificial intelligence and how the different companies in that sector are deploying the technology, and that will, I think, in many cases, lead you to the ones that are going to succeed.
So, what's Waymo doing? Have you studied what they're doing with the cars?
Well, Waymo is really the leader in fully autonomous cars, right? In other words, cars that essentially are able to operate without a driver at all, unlike Tesla, for example, where you've still got, you know, a driver assistance system, right? It still relies on a driver. You know, Waymo is targeting what's called level 4 autonomy, where you literally don't need a driver at all. And you know, they've got more experience doing that than any other company. Although the GM-owned subsidiary Cruise is also making a lot of good progress. They've just announced that they're going to have driverless cars in San Francisco that people can actually pay to take a ride in, which is really quite remarkable. I mean, San Francisco is a pretty difficult city to drive in, right? So we are seeing real progress there. And I think, you know, it's unclear to me what how the business model for these is going to work out, because these are very, very expensive cars. And, you know, it's unclear that you can really charge that much money for a ride in one of these cars. I don't think you can charge more than what Uber would charge. So to me, the business model isn't that clear, because if you look at a company like Uber, what they do is they push a lot of the expense onto the drivers, right? The drivers own the car, so those aren't on Uber's balance sheet. The drivers maintain the cars, keep the cars clean. They do a lot of stuff beyond just driving the cars. So when you get to a service like Waymo, you know, the driver is gone and the car can drive itself, but now the company has to assume all that burden, including the capital ownership of these very expensive cars and maintaining them, keeping them clean and all of that. So I'm actually a bit more skeptical of the business model of these ride sharing, you know, fully automated ride sharing companies in some ways. So we'll have to see whether or not that turns out to be highly viable.
Yeah, that excites me. You know, when I think of a world of driverless cars, other than the freedom aspect of not being able to go where you want to go, but, you know, less accidents, less drunk driving, you know, there could be numerous implications for driverless cars, which is exciting. But it's amazing that, so you think Waymo is way ahead of Tesla?
Waymo is certainly ahead in terms of building fully autonomous systems, but they're taking very, very different approaches. You know, Tesla believes it can get there incrementally, right? By moving from a driver assist system that gets better and better until it finally approaches full autonomy. We'll have to see if that's possible. But definitely, Waymo is taking a much more careful, I think, responsible, approach toward building fully autonomous cars.
Well, so folks, we'll take our final break of the hour with Martin Ford. And if you schedule your 45-minute ultimate financial game plan, that's 45 minutes with our financial quarterback team of fiduciary advisors at Wealth Quarterback. Call me, get to meet me, shake my hand, 888-988-JOSH. We're in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Long Island, all around the country, Pennsylvania, wherever you are, within the sound of my voice. I'd love to meet with you, and we'll give you a copy of Martin's latest book, Rule of the Robots. When you schedule and keep your no obligation review, call us now, 888-988-JOSH, 888-988-5674. We'll be back with parting thoughts after this. And we're back. This is Josh Jelinski, the financial quarterback. So, Martin, anything we've not touched on that you would like to share with our audience? Maybe something
I just emphasize again that this is an incredibly important technology. Definitely, everyone should be worried about the potential impact on the job market. So if you are currently doing a job that you feel is boring, that is routine, repetitive, if you feel you're going to work and you're doing the same kinds of things again and again, and you're not really learning or growing or taking on new challenges, you've probably got a job that is susceptible to automation via algorithms or via a robot at some point. And you really should be thinking about that and thinking about how you can maybe shift your career so that you're doing things that are less subject to automation. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself at risk in the future. And again, everyone needs to think of all the implications of AI going forward, so that you can take advantage of it in your career, whether it's as an investor or maybe as an entrepreneur or as an employee, whatever your role is. And so you can also be alert to the things that we need to worry about as these technologies advance. We've talked a lot about privacy, for example. We could just gradually kind of lose our privacy in a world where technologies like facial recognition become much more prevalent and so forth. And that's a real danger. So people need to be aware of this.
What about what Jack Dorsey is talking about with creating like a Web 5? So everything's encrypted and you kind of like a decentralized web. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's
sort of a different world. You have Facebook, Google, Microsoft, big data. They have large swaths of our data. They're going to be able to program these machines. And then will there be sort of a freedom web that develops that's sort of outside of this ecosystem, maybe using like something like blockchain or Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see. I mean, there is an enormous amount of interest and hype about that. It's what's called Web3. And basically, I think the kind of vision behind it is, it's more decentralized and there's kind of a payment system built into it. So you'll be able to do things on the internet, create content on the internet, and there'll be kind of a built-in mechanism that you can get paid for that. And the hope is that if that really becomes the prevailing standard, then instead of companies like Google and Facebook hoovering up all the income from what anyone is doing, it'll be a better distribution. But I'm personally a bit skeptical of that vision. We'll have to see if they can really make that work.
No, exciting. So Martin Ford, Rule of the Robots, thank you for joining us. And folks, you can get his book by going to Amazon. Anything you'd like to plug here today, Martin, as we conclude the interview?
That's it. You can find me also on Twitter. My Twitter handle is mfordfuture, and I usually tweet every day about AI and how things are progressing. And you can find both Rule of the Robots and my earlier book, Rise of the Robots, which focuses much more specifically on the impact on jobs and the potential for unemployment. Those are both available on Amazon.
No, fantastic. So folks, give us a call now, 888-988-JOSH for the free 45-minute wealth blueprint. And I'll give you a copy of Rule of the Robots. Exciting interview, Martin Ford, futurist, artificial intelligence and robotics expert. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.